Have you ever imagined that a simple note left for a stranger on a rainy night could completely change the course of your life? Isabel was just covering her cousin's shift at a mountain inn. It was supposed to be quick, barely noticeable. But then he showed up, soaked, no luggage, eyes fixed on the floor. Logan Hayes, a man she didn't recognize, but who carried the weight of a silent collapse. The glass door groaned under the weight of the storm. Isabel barely looked up from the old book in her hands when she noticed the figure appear. Tall, drenched, with the look of someone who had lost more than just an umbrella. Water dripped from his dark hair, forming little rivers across the polished wood floor. He stopped at the front desk without saying a word, just exhaled slowly like he was holding himself together by a thread. Stick around until the end. You'll find out how a single act of compassion can reroute a destiny, and why the strongest kind of courage is the one that grows in silence. Like, comment, share, and subscribe. Because sometimes, all a person needs is one sentence written at the right moment. "Good evening. Do you need a room?" she asked, adjusting her glasses with the tip of her finger. No answer. Just a barely there nod. Like even that took effort. The system was running slow, the warmth of the forgotten tea still rising from the mug by the keyboard. But Isabel didn't take her eyes off him. There was something there, a thick, quiet emptiness that clung to him like fog. She typed slowly, feeling the silence settle like an unspoken confession. When she handed him the key, their fingers brushed for a second. Cold, shaking, not from the weather, but from sheer exhaustion. "Room 4, second floor. Extra blankets in the closet," she murmured, trying not to sound concerned. But she was, deeply, and couldn't even explain why. 40 minutes later, she saw him outside in the inn's garden, still soaked, sitting on a stone bench like the rain was trying to wash away something he couldn't reach. Motionless, head down, shoulders slumped, and somehow, that hurt her too. Not because she knew him, but because she'd been him, invisible, in pieces. Isabel didn't know his name, didn't know where he came from, but she knew that sometimes all it takes is one sentence to change everything. She grabbed a notepad, tore off a page, and wrote with her messy, librarian-like handwriting, "If you're still breathing today, you're already stronger than you think." She folded the note carefully, climbed the stairs like she was guarding a secret, and slipped it under room 4. The next morning, the room was empty. Bed made, no trace left behind, as if he'd never existed. But the note was gone. That same morning, Isabel went back to her usual routine of loaned books, dog-eared pages, and dreams postponed yet again. She had no idea that her small gesture would return to her one day, with the strength of a storm. Between dusty shelves and borrowed stories, Isabel survived. The public library was more than just a job. It was her refuge. She treated books like they were people, but kept her own story locked away. She wrote at night, hidden in her aunt's attic, surrounded by cold coffee and stacks of rejected manuscripts. Her short stories talked about hope, but her real life couldn't even keep the rent paid. She didn't have a literature degree or publishing connections. All she had was pain, and a raw urge to turn silence into story. Her coworkers didn't even know she wrote. Isabel kept that dream tucked away like a childhood diary, afraid they'd laugh, afraid they'd listen, afraid she'd never be enough. Across town, Logan Hayes was falling apart. Once hailed as a young genius in the green tech world, now he was the eye of a legal and media storm. Accused of mismanagement and corporate betrayal, his name was torn apart in headlines and hashtags. Investors pulled out, friends disappeared. The scandal bled across social media, and the world seemed to delight in watching him crash. He didn't just lose his company, he lost faith, in people, in love, in himself. His fiancée dumped him in a 30-second voice message. His parents blamed him for dragging their name through the mud. The following days blurred into pills, bottles, and cheap hotels, until he drove into the mountains with an empty suitcase and a quiet wish to vanish. The inn was random, the rain, an excuse. The girl at the front desk, he barely registered her face. But that note, that crumpled piece of paper with words that felt like they'd been pulled straight from his breakdown, that did something. Or maybe it undid something. He wasn't sure yet. But for the first time in months, he didn't want to disappear. He wanted to understand why someone who didn't know him saw him. Meanwhile, Isabel kept ignoring her own cries for help. She cared for fictional lives while letting hers starve. Every time she wrote a scene about resilience, she stopped halfway. Not for lack of ideas, but because she couldn't quite believe happy endings existed outside other people's pages. Two different worlds. Two silences that recognized each other in a single moment. But they didn't know that yet. The real conflict wasn't out there. It was what they each carried inside. She, the fear of dreaming out loud. He, the fear of being seen as more than a mistake. The universe brought them together that night like a forgotten draft tucked inside an old novel. A page marked with invisible tears. No plot yet, no ending, but a whispered promise scattered in the rain. And without Isabel knowing, her quiet gesture planted a seed that would return to her months later, in the form of an email. I saw your name on a forgotten label. I found your story between the lines of that note. I'd like to talk about what you write. LH. Isabel wasn't the kind of person who turned heads. She moved through the streets like someone trying not to bother the world. Always wore oversized sweaters, kept her hair in a messy bun, and walked in worn-out shoes that squeaked across the library floors. But those who really knew her, which was rare, could see a quiet fierceness behind all that stillness. Ever since she was a kid, books had been her escape. When her parents fought, she hid between the pages. When her mom got sick, she read aloud to calm her down. And when her mom passed, Isabel dove into stories like she was learning how to breathe all over again. Every character became a companion, every happy ending a secret hope that pain wasn't forever. Working at the library wasn't glamorous, but it was what she could manage. After her aunt took her in as a teenager, Isabel grew up juggling responsibilities she never asked for. She helped around the house, looked after her cousin, and picked up shifts to help pay the bills. Slowly, she buried her own dreams in the name of stability, but she never stopped writing, even if it was on napkins, book margins, or notes on her phone. Her stories were always about second chances, maybe because she was still waiting for hers. One unfinished novel lived inside a red folder, tucked away in the back of a drawer. Over 200 pages, and not a single reader but her. Isabel had eyes that noticed more than they let on. She observed people like she was reading poetry, quietly, between the lines. Maybe that's why she noticed on that rainy night the weight on Logan Hayes' shoulders before she even knew his name. She knew sadness, not as something distant, but as an old, familiar guest. Her days followed a rhythm, checking returns, wiping down dusty covers, organizing literary events for the handful of regulars. She didn't smile often, but when she did, it was real. Her green eyes lit up when she talked about Clarice, Virginia, or Marquez. Yet no one knew that she wrote too. Part of that was fear, part of it shame. She'd submitted a few pieces to writing contests. Every single one rejected. The cruelest reply read, "Lacks commercial appeal." Since then, she kept her writing hidden, like scars. She believed she could only tell stories if they didn't belong to her. But Isabel had a quiet kind of courage, the kind that didn't show up in grand gestures. It lived in the small choices, like taking care of others, even when she was exhausted, like listening without judgment, like writing even when no one was reading. The kind of strength the world rarely applauds, but that builds invisible bridges between broken souls. And that night, when she saw a stranger drowning in his own pain, she felt something she couldn't name, an old impulse from someone who knows that sometimes it's easier to hand someone a note than to hold out your hand. That said a lot about her. Isabel didn't shout. She wrote. That was how she asked for help, or offered it. What she didn't know yet was that the small piece of herself she left for a stranger wouldn't just be read, it would change her story too. The girl who hid her dreams inside notebooks had finally been heard, and the echo of that was about to cut through her routine like the breeze that comes right before a storm. Waking up early was routine, but never easy. The alarm went off at 6 a.m., and Isabel got up without a word. In the kitchen, the smell of weak coffee and stale bread. Her aunt was already heading out to the market, and her cousin, still asleep, counted on someone to cover her shifts now and then. Isabel always said yes, even when she couldn't, even when it hurt. On her way to work, she braved packed buses, wet shoes, and heavy thoughts. The city always seemed too fast to notice someone like her. Those 20 minutes were the only time her story had room to breathe. She spent them imagining scenes from her book. At the library, the director was cold and strict. She never acknowledged Isabel's silent effort, demanded results, dismissed new ideas. When Isabel once suggested a reading club, she was met with a flat, "That's not worth the return," colder than the tile in the bathroom. Isabel smiled and pretended it didn't sting. Money was tight. She counted coins for the subway and cut shampoo bottles in half to make them last. Her bag was coming apart at the seams, and her shoes had long outlived their lifespan. Even so, when a curious child walked into the library, she knelt down with care and recommended books with a spark in her eyes. Her health wasn't great. Headaches, insomnia, a constant tiredness that no amount of sleep fixed. Sometimes her chest would tighten out of nowhere, like the air had just left. But she never said anything, figured it was all in her head, or maybe her heart. But who had the time or money to check? One afternoon, she came home to find a notice taped to the door. Rent was overdue. Her aunt didn't say anything, just gave her a weary look and went back to scrubbing the stove. Isabel went into her room and cried quietly, not because of the bill, but because she felt like a burden, a weight no one asked for but that she carried anyway. Still, she didn't stop writing. Sometimes she'd wake up in the middle of the night and scribble ideas on her phone. Other times she'd cry in front of the screen, stuck on paragraph 2. But she always came back to it, because it was all she had, words. Once she got a freelance gig editing school materials. She said yes, slept 2 hours a night for a week. Not for the money, it was barely anything, but because for a few days she felt like she was doing something with her pen. Something real, something hers. These small struggles, stacked like poorly shelved books, built an invisible wall around Isabel. But she didn't complain. Never did. She just squinted and pushed forward, with the quiet strength of someone who knows that pain can't be rushed, but hope shouldn't be ignored either. That's why the note she left for a stranger held more than just words. It was, in truth, a translation of her own resilience, a reflection of the message she wished someone had once written for her. And maybe, without even knowing it, that note was finally on its way back to her. Love stories like this? Support our channel, subscribe now. It was on a gray Monday morning when Isabel saw the flyer taped to the library door. City Book Fair, submissions open for independent authors. It was crooked, printed on regular paper, and half torn at the edge. But to her it felt like a secret invitation, like someone whispering, "Maybe this time, it's yours." She spent the entire day staring at it, like someone eyeing a slightly open door. At the end of her shift, she pulled the flyer down, folded it, and slipped it into her bag. No one noticed. On the way home, her heart beat faster, not out of fear, but out of possibility. It was a different kind of fear, the kind that almost felt like courage in disguise. That night, she opened her manuscript again. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. The story was still there, but it felt asleep, like a candle under glass. She read a paragraph out loud. It was good. She knew it was. But then the familiar voice whispered, "It's not enough." Still, she kept going. Rewrote scenes, cut dialogue, tweaked the ending. For the first time in months, she wrote without hiding. She applied using an old email. Sent in the book title, "Things I Don't Say," a name that hurt just to type. She told no one, not her aunt, not her best friend, not even the front desk coworker. She kept the secret like a gift no one might open, but wrapped it with care anyway. Something changed in the days that followed. Not in the world, but in her. She moved with a quiet energy, like she had a string of light tucked in her pocket. The routine was the same: shelves, check-ins, empty library aisles. But inside, she knew. She was doing something. For the first time, she wasn't just reading other people's stories. She was fighting for her own. 2 weeks later, the fair's reply came in a short email. Manuscript selected. Booth number 14. Isabel reread it 4 times before believing it. Almost deleted it by accident. She cried in the library bathroom, muffling her sobs with cheap toilet paper. It was just a book fair. Just a table with her name. But for her, it was everything. With what little money she had, she printed 5 copies. Basic binding, cardstock cover. She designed it herself. 2 hands holding a torn page. Too symbolic? Maybe. But it was honest. It was hers. On the day of the event, she arrived early. Set up her table with dried flowers and a white tablecloth borrowed from her aunt. Sat with her hands in her lap, nervous, watching authors around her with glossy banners, giveaways, and publishing partners. She felt small, ridiculous, invisible. But she didn't leave. She stayed. For hours, no one stopped by her booth. Until an elderly woman with white hair read the title and said, "That name caught my eye." She bought a copy. Asked for an autograph. Isabel's hands shook as she signed her name. When she handed over the book, the woman smiled and said, "Thank you. I needed something like this." That moment made everything worth it. That night, Isabel went home exhausted, but changed. She had faced something bigger than shame, the risk. And even though she sold only 2 copies, she felt like she'd published 1,000, because she had put herself out there, with no guarantees, no armor. For the first time, she had tried. And that was just the beginning. The email arrived on a Tuesday, skies clear, like lightning striking on a sunny day. The sender? LH. That's it. The subject line. "The note you wrote me." Isabel's knees nearly gave out as she read the first line. "You don't know me, but I wouldn't have survived that night if it weren't for you." It was Logan. His words were brief, but heavy, and she knew that kind of weight. Real pain, still fresh. He told her he was rebuilding his life after losing everything, and that on the worst days he'd reread her note as a reminder that it was still worth trying. He explained how he found her name through the inn's manager, how he tracked down her library, how he'd read a few of her pieces online, and how he believed in her. "You write with soul," he said, "and the world needs more people like that." At the end, a proposal, an invitation, to work as an editorial assistant at a small publishing label he had just partnered with. This isn't charity, it's recognition. Isabel read the email so many times, she memorized it. Then she closed her laptop and cried. In the days that followed, they exchanged short, timid emails, each packed with meaning. He asked about her ideas. She replied, unsure. He read her drafts and praised them. She doubted herself. But deep down, something rare was taking root. Not just a career opportunity, but a space for truth and being seen. When they finally met at a quiet cafe downtown, Isabel showed up with a folder in her arms and fear in her eyes. Logan looked different from how she remembered. Lighter, but still carrying a shadow on his shoulders. The first thing he did was pull a folded piece of paper from his pocket, worn from time. The note. Her note. "You wrote this, and I came back because of it." She didn't know what to say. Just smiled, unsure if she wanted to cry or run. Logan continued, "Now I want to do the same for you. Not because you owe me anything, but because you've got something that deserves the light." They started working together. Slowly. Simple meetings. Honest feedback. Emails that turned into real conversations. Logan read her chapters with rare focus. He didn't sugarcoat things. He told her what worked, what hit deep, what needed trimming. And for the first time, she listened, without shrinking. Their connection grew into more than just professional. Isabel laughed more, wrote with more freedom. Logan, in turn, let pieces of himself show. Fears, disappointments, the shame of falling apart in public. Together they found shelter in each other. No labels, no rush, just presence. One night, after editing a full chapter, Logan said, "If I'd read this on my worst day, I would have cried. And I think I would have survived with a little more dignity." Isabel didn't answer, just reached out and touched his arm gently. "The way you say I get it. without saying a word. And that's when she knew. Even if her book was filled with fictional characters, something real was beating inside it. And even if Logan had helped her get this far, what he saw in her wasn't neediness. It was talent. It was truth, not pity. And that changed everything. The final revision of the book was almost done. Logan had scheduled a meeting with a major publisher to discuss getting it out into the world. Everything seemed to be falling into place. But for the first time in weeks, Isabel couldn't write a single line. The blinking cursor felt like a silent accusation. Something inside her chest was off, an uneasiness she couldn't name. That night, she walked alone to the library after hours, sat on the bench where she used to write in secret, tucked between the romance shelves. Her notebook was there, resting on the table, but her hands trembled. She looked at the words she'd already written and wondered, is this book still mine? Lately, everything came wrapped in praise. Open doors, invitations, coffees with important names, and she was supposed to feel happy, but there was a knot in her throat, a voice whispering, "You're only here because he brought you, not because you made it on your own." She decided not to go to the meeting, sent Logan a short message. "I need time." He called. She didn't answer, not because she was running from him, but because she needed to finally hear herself. She sat on her bed, hugged her pillow, and cried out of frustration. Frustration for needing space when things were finally going well. Frustration for feeling dependent. Frustration with herself. The next morning, she wrote to the publisher, thanked them for the offer, and turned it down. Then she took the printed manuscript, placed it in a box, and sealed it with tape. Not to throw it away, but to start over. For her. With her. She knew she might lose everything she'd gained so far, but she also knew that if she didn't try on her own, she'd never feel whole. Logan showed up at the library that afternoon. His eyes were low, his smile unsure. "Why didn't you let me explain?" She took a deep breath. "Because it wasn't about you. It was about me. I needed to know if I could get there without your hand pushing me." He nodded, didn't argue, just said, "If you want, I can wait for you there." In the days that followed, Isabel returned to her old routine. But something was different. She didn't give up on the book. She rewrote chapters, cut passages, changed the title. She started taking freelance editing gigs on the side, using that income to pay an independent designer. She wanted to do it all herself. Knew it would be slower, harder, but also more real. Her nights were quiet again, but this time the silence was fertile. It wasn't emptiness. It was growth. She missed Logan, the support, the conversations. But she also felt proud. For the first time, she wasn't just a background character in her own story. And then one Sunday afternoon, between a cup of tea and a teary-eyed PDF export, Isabel realized maybe the strength she'd been chasing had always been there. Logan was the mirror. But the reflection, that was hers. The beginning was lonely. No Logan. No publisher. No promises. Just Isabel and the sound of keys filling the midnight silence. She woke up at 5 to edit. Went to bed at 1 after rewriting entire scenes. With each deleted line, she felt closer to the essence. Her book was finally learning to breathe, without crutches. She spent her tight salary on an online creative writing course, posted excerpts in anonymous forums, and received brutal feedback. Some knocked her down. Others taught her. But none stopped her. With every reply, she came back stronger, like a wound learning to heal in motion. She met Clara, a young illustrator who worked in a cafe and designed covers for indie authors. They shared ideas, dreams, insecurities. In a packed coffee shop, Isabel showed her some pages, and for the first time heard, "I cried reading this." Not out of pity, but truthfully. It was a new kind of validation. Raw, honest, real. For 2 months she worked with quiet obsession. Sent the manuscript to beta readers, tweaked every line of dialogue, renamed chapters until they read like poetry. She chose a simple but elegant layout, and decided she would self-publish. No big house, no Logan. Just her. She made an account from scratch, posted a shy photo holding the book with the caption, "The voice I hid for years is finally here, and it's all mine." It got 30 likes, but each one felt like a hug, a badge of courage. In the following days, she delivered books by hand, wrote personal notes, and answered every message with gratitude. Sales weren't explosive, but the impact was. One woman said the book reminded her of her sister who passed. A teenager wrote that he'd never cried over a character before. Isabel read every message, and cried too. Success didn't come in numbers. It came in connection, in knowing her pain had become someone else's healing. It was like every paragraph she once hid had finally found a home in someone's heart. She was no longer invisible. Her aunt, once skeptical, hugged her with teary eyes after reading the chapter about grief. "Now I get why you stayed up all night," she said. Isabel just smiled. She didn't need to explain anymore. Her words were speaking for her. One afternoon, during a local book fair, she was invited to read a passage aloud. Her hands trembled, but her voice held steady. Afterward, a girl from the audience stood up and asked, "How did you find the courage to write about all this?" Isabel paused, took a deep breath, and answered, "Because writing was the only way I knew how to not disappear." That night, she walked alone through the city streets, book tucked under her arm, wind on her face, and she realized she wasn't lost. She was exactly where she was meant to be. For the first time, she didn't feel like she owed anything to anyone, not the world, not Logan, not even her own pain. She was whole, and ready for whatever came next. Help this channel grow. Like, comment, and subscribe. The official book launch was set for a Saturday, a small event at a local bookstore that welcomed indie authors. Isabel arrived early, wearing a simple blue dress and a shy smile. She carefully arranged the books on the table, set out some flowers, took a deep breath. This was her moment. People began to arrive. Co-workers from the library, readers who'd found her online, curious strangers. The atmosphere was intimate and electric. When she stepped onto the small makeshift stage to speak, her hands trembled, but her voice didn't. This book is made of scars, but also of choices. And today I choose to stand here, whole, for me. And then, she saw him, standing at the back of the bookstore, a book in his hands, eyes fixed on her. Logan Hayes. Thinner, calmer, but with the same quiet depth in his eyes. Seeing him made her heart race, not because she expected it, but because she never thought he'd come. He didn't bring flowers, didn't give a speech, didn't approach her during the event. He just stood there, like a bookmarked page waiting to be read again. And when everyone else had left, he walked up slowly, pulled something from his pocket, the note. The same one, now crumpled, faded, nearly unreadable. "This paper saved me. But what you wrote here, that's exactly what you did with your life." She smiled. Didn't cry, didn't run, just asked, "Why did you come back?" He answered with the quiet honesty she always admired. "Because now you're exactly where you're meant to be. And I needed to see it with my own eyes." Then Logan told her something that caught her off guard. Not only had he bought into the publishing house, but he'd used his influence to keep her name out of the media after the scandal. He had cleared the way so she could walk it without ever asking for credit, without interfering. But once you chose to do it on your own, I knew. You'd already become who you needed to be. Isabel said nothing. The pride that once kept them apart now felt unnecessary. He hadn't pushed her. He simply held the space for her to find herself. And that was more noble than any kind of help. He handed her a freshly bought copy of her book and asked with a small smile, "Will you sign it for me?" She picked up the pen, and instead of just signing her name, she wrote, "For the one who read my soul before I even understood the plot." That night, they didn't leave together. There was no kiss, no promises, just a look, a quiet reunion between two more grown-up versions of themselves. And in Isabel's heart, the certainty that sometimes the real plot twist is finally recognizing yourself. 2 days after the launch, Logan called. His voice was steady, but she could sense hesitation in the air. "Can we talk? No publishers, no books, no pressure." She agreed. They met in a neutral spot, a park where she used to walk when she needed to think. It was a warm, late afternoon, the air full of something that felt like a beginning. She arrived first, sat on a wooden bench, notebook in her lap, too nervous to open it. When Logan showed up, he wore a white shirt and an easy expression, but his eyes betrayed a storm still brewing inside. He sat next to her and didn't speak for a while, just listened to the breeze through the trees. "I never wanted to be the hero in your story," he said. "I just couldn't stand the idea of your voice never being heard." Isabel looked at him, serious. "But you get that I needed to find that out on my own, right? I had to prove it, not to myself." Logan nodded. "And you did, with more courage than anyone I know." She took a deep breath. "And you? What is it you want now?" He took a moment. "For a long time I thought I needed to rebuild my name, my status, but now I just want to rebuild something I can't quite name. Something that started the night you really saw me." Isabel gave a half smile. "You think that's something we can rebuild?" "I don't know," he said, "but I want to try. And not with promises or rescue missions, just with presence." The tension wasn't between them. It was between what they felt and the fear of losing their autonomy, their sense of self. Isabel, once invisible, was now shining. Logan, once the public giant, was learning how to be small on purpose. Just someone beside her, not in front of her. She opened the notebook, showed him the new story she was working on. "It's not a romance, it's about love, but not the kind that saves you, the kind that walks with you." He read a passage, went quiet, then reached over and gently held her hand. "Do you have any idea how many people you're going to reach with this?" she replied. "I don't know. But today, it reached me." They talked for hours, about old wounds, broken families, the silences that shaped their lives. They laughed at little things, shared long pauses. There were no big decisions, just a quiet alliance. They were ready to meet each other without the weight of what they'd lost, only with the intention to build something new. When they said goodbye, he told her, "You changed everything, and you didn't even know it." She answered, "Maybe because I stopped trying to fix everyone and started writing myself." That was the end of the conflict. Not a victory over someone else, but over their own shadows. The following months passed with the ease of someone who, for the first time, wasn't racing against time, but walking alongside it. Isabel now split her days between community reading projects, meetups with readers, and new stories. But above all, she was at peace. The restlessness that once weighed on her chest now pulsed like a steady flame. Her book, once a bundle of doubts, had become a bridge. Letters poured in from readers sharing how her words helped them move forward, talk to their parents, or start writing their own story. Isabel read each one with teary eyes. The girl who used to write in secret between library shelves had become someone who gave voice to other silent souls. She also rebuilt things at home. Her relationship with her aunt, once distant, had grown softer. They cooked together, watched soap operas, spoke little, but with more truth. With her cousin, mutual respect had taken root over time. They now understood how much they'd quietly supported each other, even when they didn't know how. Things with Logan moved forward with maturity. No labels. They met on Sundays, walked in silence, exchanged ideas about new projects. He still read her drafts with the same care. But now she didn't need the validation. She simply appreciated the presence. Two once lonely people who had learned how to walk side by side without losing themselves. She had learned how to say no without guilt, to choose jobs that made sense, even if they paid less, to no longer accept hollow compliments or criticism from voices that had never truly listened. She discovered that success wasn't noise or numbers. It was staying power. It was when your words continued to live inside someone long after the last page. Her second book was already in the works. A blend of fiction and memory. Something more intimate, more mature, and above all, freer. She didn't write to please anymore. She wrote to reach, to build bridges, to never forget where she came from or what she had to cross. One afternoon she visited the library where it all began, and found her first book on the local author's shelf. She ran her fingers across the spine like someone touching an old scar that no longer hurts. Next to it, a girl sat on the floor reading, eyes locked on the story. Isabel sat quietly on the other side of the aisle and smiled. It was here. It had always been here. Before leaving, she slipped a note into the pages of her own book. If you're still reading this, you're already stronger than you think. And that's when it hit her. Growing up isn't about outrunning pain. It's about learning how to use it as ink. It's not erasing the past, it's telling it in a way that frees you instead of defining you. Isabel wasn't just a dreamer anymore. She was the author of her own journey. A woman who had learned how to fully exist, in every word. Months later, a small event brought together indie authors in a warm-lit room with folding chairs. Isabel was invited to speak on The Power of Words on Difficult Days. She walked onto the stage with calm steps, holding her first copy, edges yellowed like an old friend. I used to think no one wanted to hear my voice, so I wrote like I was whispering. But I've learned that sometimes, whispers reach places that shouting never could. The room was silent. Some listeners had tears in their eyes. Others simply leaned in. It doesn't matter if your story starts in pain, she continued. What matters is if you have the courage to keep writing, and to write the next chapter in your own handwriting. Afterward, she stepped down and met eyes with Logan sitting in the back. He didn't stand to clap. He didn't need to. He smiled. The kind of smile that says, I knew you'd get here. And that was enough. As she walked out, a young woman approached her, eyes wide and shining. How did you know your story mattered? Isabel held the question for a beat, then answered, I didn't, but I wrote it anyway. Because sometimes, you have to be the first reader of your own truth. Isabel's story didn't end with applause, book deals, or headlines. It ended exactly where it needed to, in her own acceptance. And it began again the moment she decided to share her pain as an act of healing, not just for herself, but for others. The book was re-released months later with a new dedication. To everyone who ever wrote invisible notes hoping to be read. Isabel never expected it to make the news. But it did. Not for the sales, not for the awards, but because at a book fair in another state, someone found a copy of her book, with a handwritten note inside. The same words she had left behind years ago. If you're still breathing today, you're already stronger than you think. The note went viral. Stories flooded the comments. People began writing similar messages and leaving them in books, cafes, and bus stops. As if her transformed pain had learned to walk on its own, like a seed carried by the wind. That same week, Logan took her somewhere special, the garden at the inn. The bench was still there. The rain this time was only a memory. He looked her in the eye and said, Now I understand. You didn't save me. You just reminded me I could still save myself. She smiled. And you showed me my words were allowed to leave the dark. And just like that, it all came full circle. Not with a period, but with an ellipsis. A quiet space for something new to begin. If you've been holding on to a dream, feeling invisible, or thinking it's too late, maybe this story was the reminder you needed. Drop a comment below. What note would you want to receive today? And maybe you'll be the one writing someone else's tomorrow. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Here, every story is an invitation to remember, you matter. And your voice, even if it's soft, can change someone's world. Coming up next, what if a long-lost apology reopened the door to a love that was never truly forgotten? Stay with us. There's still so much story to tell.